The key scraped in the lock. A sound of grating finality. I stepped over the threshold of my own home, but it was no longer mine. The air was thick with the cloying scent of potpourri and triumphant smugness. My mother-in-law, Beatrice, was standing in the middle of the living room, arms crossed, a look of profound satisfaction on her face. Beside her, my wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, Claire, was methodically placing my books into a cardboard box. She didn't look up. "What is this?" I asked, my voice a low rumble that felt foreign in my own chest. Beatrice stepped forward, her expression one of practiced, condescending pity. "Thomas, dear," she said, her voice dripping with faux sympathy, "Claire has made a decision. It's over. We thought it would be cleaner this way. We've packed a few of your things. The rest can be sent for later. It's time for you to leave." I looked at Claire. She still wouldn't meet my eye. She just placed another one of my books, a first edition I had cherished for years, into the box with a careless thud. "Leave," I repeated, the word tasting like ash. "This is my house." Beatrice let out a small tinkling laugh, a sound I had come to despise over the last 15 years. "Oh, Thomas, don't be difficult. It was never really your house, was it? It was always Claire's, through her family. My money paid the down payment. My money paid for the renovations. You were just living here. And now, it's time to move on. For everyone's sake." She gestured towards the door, a queen dismissing a courtier from her presence. In that moment, as I stood there in the home I had helped design, in the room where I had raised my children, being told to leave by a woman whose entire existence was a monument to unearned arrogance, I did not feel rage. I did not feel heartbreak. I felt a quiet, cold, and utterly lucid sense of clarity. A switch flipped in my mind. The husband was gone. The professional had taken his place. My name is Thomas Albright, 55 years old, and for 30 years, my work has been in the world of contracts and compliance for large-scale engineering projects. My job is to read the fine print. I navigate the labyrinthine world of building codes, of zoning ordinances, of multi-hundred-page agreements between corporations and governments. I find the loopholes, the hidden clauses, the forgotten easements. I am the man who tells a billion-dollar construction firm that their beautiful new skyscraper is 3 inches over a property line defined in an 1892 water rights agreement, and that they have to tear it down. I live in a world of details, of facts, of things that are legally, immutably true, regardless of how much one wishes they were not. Beatrice and Claire saw me as a quiet, boring man who dealt in tedious paperwork. A man who was easily managed, easily dismissed. They had made a common mistake. They had confused my quiet diligence for a lack of power. They had never bothered to read the fine print of our life together. They were so confident in their narrative that this was their house, bought with their money, that they had overlooked the single most important detail, the detail that was about to bring their entire arrogant world crashing down around them. "You're right, Beatrice," I said, my voice suddenly calm, my composure returning as if summoned by a familiar command. "You are absolutely right. The money for this house did come from you. But you didn't read the deed, did you?" I looked at Claire, who finally, reluctantly lifted her head. I looked at Beatrice, whose smug expression began to falter, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. They thought they were executing a well-planned coup. They had no idea they were trespassing. They didn't know that the deed to this house, the legal document that defined its reality, contained a quiet, elegant little trap I had set more than a decade ago. A trap that was about to spring shut. My journey into the world of contractual self-defense had begun 10 years prior, not with suspicion, but with a project. Beatrice had decided, as she often did, that the house needed a complete gut renovation. It was a gift, she had announced, a way to increase the value of Claire's asset. She had brought in her own team of designers and contractors, a group of slick, overpriced charlatans who specialized in creating rooms that looked good in magazines, but were functionally useless. As a man who appreciated solid, practical design, I found the process excruciating. But I knew better than to argue. My role in this family was to be the quiet, stable, and endlessly agreeable provider. While they were picking out Italian marble and designer light fixtures, I was doing what I always do. I was reading the paperwork. The renovation was a massive undertaking, and it required a series of new permits, contracts, and most importantly, a refinancing of the mortgage to pay for it all. Beatrice was providing the money, but because the house was in my and Claire's name, we were the ones who had to sign the loan documents. I sat in our lawyer's office, A man handpicked by Beatrice, of course. And I read every single line of the 100-page mortgage agreement, and I found a clause. It was a standard, boilerplate clause, common in refinancing agreements, that allowed for a one-time quitclaim or deed modification to be filed with the county for a nominal fee. It was a legal tool for cleaning up titles, for adding or removing a name without having to go through a full sale. It was a piece of legal minutia that most people, including I suspected Beatrice's hand-picked lawyer, would overlook. A flashback, sharp and vivid. Beatrice, standing in the middle of our half-demolished kitchen, waving a marble sample. "Thomas, don't you just love this Calicut gold? It's what they used in the lobby of the new Sterling Tower." It screamed success. She had looked at me, her eyes sweeping over my simple practical clothes with a familiar look of mild disappointment. "You have to project success to be successful, Thomas. It's all about the optics." She wasn't just renovating a house. She was branding it. And by extension, she was branding her daughter, and through a process of reluctant association, me. She was creating a stage set for the life she thought her daughter deserved. I saw in that moment the fundamental instability of her worldview. It was all surface, no foundation, and I, the man who spent his life analyzing foundations, felt a sudden, urgent need to reinforce my own. After the refinancing was complete, I took that small, overlooked clause, and I used it. I went to a different lawyer, a sharp, discreet woman I knew from my professional life. Together we drafted a new deed. It was a quitclaim deed. It removed Claire's name from the title of the house and replaced it with a legal entity. It was a simple, legal, and completely private transaction. It required only my signature as the primary mortgage holder and a small filing fee at the county records office. The new deed listed the sole owner of the property as the Albright Family Trust, a trust I had quietly created years before, after my own father passed away, to manage my inheritance and to provide for my children. The trust's sole trustee and manager was me. The beneficiaries were my 2 children. Claire was not named in the trust. It was not a malicious act, not at the time. It was a defensive one, a quiet, legal reinforcement of the foundation. It was my rainy day plan, a parachute packed away for a flight I hoped would never crash. For 10 years, that deed had sat, silent and unseen, in the county archives. A legal fact, waiting for a moment like this. Now standing in my living room, being ordered out of my own home, the moment had arrived. "The deed?" Beatrice said, her voice laced with confusion. "What are you talking about? The house is in Claire's name. It has always been in Claire's name." "No, it hasn't," I said calmly. "Not for the last 10 years. The house is owned, free and clear, by a family trust. A trust of which I am the sole trustee, and our children are the sole beneficiaries. Claire has no legal ownership of this property. None at all." Claire finally spoke, her voice a mixture of disbelief and anger. "That's a lie. I never signed anything. You didn't have to," I explained, my voice still patient, as if I were explaining a complex clause to a junior associate. "The refinancing agreement you did sign gave me the legal authority to modify the deed. It was in Section 11, subsection D. I'm sure your lawyer has a copy." The color drained from Beatrice's face. She was a woman who understood money and ownership above all else. She understood what a deed was. She understood what a trust was. And she understood, with dawning horror, that she had just been completely, utterly outmaneuvered. "You can't do this," she whispered, the words a desperate, hollow sound. "Oh, I can," I said. I pulled out my phone. "In fact, I already have. As the legal owner of this property, I am now informing you both that you are trespassing. I have already contacted the local police department and a private security firm. They are on their way. I would advise you to gather your personal belongings and vacate the premises immediately." The Queen had been checkmated. The beautiful stage set she had built was not her castle. It was my fortress. And she had just been politely, legally, and irrevocably shown the door. The arrival of the police was a quiet, anticlimactic affair. 2 uniformed officers, a man and a woman, stood on the doorstep, their expressions a mixture of boredom and professional duty. Beatrice, in a last, desperate gambit, tried to play the role of the hysterical, wronged woman. "Officer, thank God you're here," she'd cried, her hand to her chest. "This man, my daughter's husband, is trying to throw us out of our own home." The male officer looked at her, then at me, his face impassive. "Ma'am, we received a call from the property owner regarding trespassers." "I am the property owner," Beatrice insisted. "My money paid for this house. I stepped forward and handed the officer a slim file. It contained a certified copy of the current deed, clearly showing the owner as the Albright Family Trust, and a copy of the trust document itself, showing me as the sole trustee. "This is a civil matter, sir," I said calmly. "A marital dispute, but the ownership of the property is not in dispute. These women have been asked to leave, and they are refusing." The officer reviewed the documents. He was not a lawyer, but he knew what a deed was. He handed the file back to me. He then turned to Beatrice and Claire. His voice was polite, but firm. "Ma'am, according to these documents, you do not own this property. The owner has asked you to leave. If you do not, he has the right to have you removed for trespassing. I would strongly advise you to collect your things and go." Beatrice stared at him, her mouth agape. The system, the authority she had always believed was on her side, had just turned against her. The law, which she saw as a tool for the wealthy to enforce their will, was being used to enforce a simple, inconvenient fact. The house was not hers. The world, for a moment, had stopped conforming to her desires. It was a shock she was clearly not equipped to handle. Defeated, they began to pack. It was a pathetic, hurried affair. Claire, who had so coolly been packing my life into boxes just an hour before, was now frantically stuffing her designer clothes into suitcases. Beatrice was silent, her face a mask of cold, impotent fury. They had come to orchestrate a swift, clean coup. They were leaving like refugees, evicted from a territory they had wrongly assumed was their own. The private security team I had hired arrived as they were leaving. Two large, impassive men in dark suits. They were from a firm I used for my corporate clients, a company that specialized in securing sensitive locations. Their presence was a quiet, powerful statement. This was no longer a family home. It was a secured asset. As Beatrice walked out the door, she turned to me one last time. "You will regret this, Thomas," she hissed. "You have destroyed this family." "No, Beatrice," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "You and I both know this family was destroyed long ago. I am just reading the fine print." They drove off in Beatrice's luxury sedan, leaving a cloud of righteous indignation in their wake. I stood in the doorway of my now quiet, now secure home. The first phase of my plan was complete. The physical asset was secured, but I knew this was just the beginning. They would not go quietly. Their next move would be a legal one. They would come after my business, my savings, my future. They would try to prove in court what they had failed to prove in my living room, that I was a man of immense wealth, and that they were entitled to a piece of it. A flashback. Our 10th wedding anniversary. I had given Claire a simple, elegant piece of jewelry. Beatrice had given us a check for $100,000. For the house, she had announced loudly at the party, an investment in my daughter's future. I saw it then too. She wasn't giving a gift. She was buying shares. She believed that her money gave her ownership, not just of the house, but of our lives. The next phase of my operation would be to prove to her, in a court of law, that her shares were worthless. I went to my study. The room was a mess, with my books half packed in boxes. I calmly began to unpack them, placing them back on the shelves, restoring order. Then I sat down at my desk and created a new file on my secure server. The file was named Beatrice. My work as a contract and compliance specialist had taught me one fundamental truth. Every transaction leaves a paper trail. Every agreement has a history. And Beatrice, for all her wealth and bluster, had a long and complex history of transactions. I was about to conduct the most thorough audit of her life she had ever experienced. The quiet, boring man who dealt in paperwork was about to show her what real paperwork looked like. The legal assault began, as I had predicted, within a week. A thick envelope arrived from a high-powered law firm, the kind that had names strung together like a string of pearls. It was a petition for divorce, filed by Claire. But the document was clearly written in the language of Beatrice. It was a work of staggering fiction. It painted me as a manipulative, controlling husband who had secretly funneled marital assets into a complex web of trusts to defraud my wife. It claimed that my business, a successful but modest engineering compliance consultancy, was a massive, multi-million-dollar enterprise. And it demanded not just half of our shared assets, but punitive damages for financial abuse. It was a declaration of total war. They were trying to paint me as a monster, a financial predator who had entrapped their innocent daughter. They were building a narrative. My job was to dismantle that narrative with a quiet, overwhelming barrage of facts. I took the document to my own lawyer, a sharp, methodical woman named Evelyn Reed. who specialized in high-conflict divorces involving complex assets. She was the legal equivalent of a structural engineer. She understood foundations. She read the petition, a small wry smile playing on her lips. "Well," she said, "they're certainly not lacking in imagination. This isn't a legal document. It's a screenplay." "What's our response?" I asked. "Our response is to refuse to engage with their fiction," she said. "We don't argue their points. We simply present the facts. We will respond with a single, comprehensive filing. It will include a copy of the deed to the house. It will include a copy of the trust documents. It will include a full, audited financial statement of the trust's assets, proving its purposes for the children. And it will include a copy of your personal financial disclosure, showing your modest salary as an employee of your own company." The strategy was to build a wall of irrefutable, boring facts. We would not engage in the emotional drama. We would simply present the legal reality. While Evelyn prepared the legal response, I began my own investigation. The core of their case rested on two false assumptions: that I was secretly wealthy, and that Beatrice's money had been the sole source of our family's financial stability. I needed to demolish both pillars. The first was easy. My finances were meticulously organized. My salary was my salary. The trust was the trust. The lines were clean. The second pillar, the one concerning Beatrice's financial contributions, was the one I decided to focus on. I began to build a complete financial history of our 15-year marriage. I had access to all our old joint bank account records, our tax returns, our mortgage statements. I spent weeks in my study, surrounded by documents, building a massive spreadsheet. It was a forensic accounting of our life together. I traced every major expense, every major source of income, and as I worked, a new picture began to emerge. Beatrice had, as she claimed, provided the down payment for the house. She had paid for the renovation, but her contributions, while flashy and significant, were only part of the story. My modest salary, year after year, had paid for everything else: the property taxes, the insurance, the utilities, the groceries, the cars, the vacations, the braces for our children's teeth, her daughter's designer wardrobe, the country club membership. My quiet, steady income had been the engine that powered their entire lifestyle. I calculated the total. Over 15 years, my direct financial contribution to the marital household was nearly 3 times the amount Beatrice had put in. Her investment wasn't an investment at all. It was a series of vanity projects, underwritten by my labor. Then I dug deeper. I looked into Beatrice's own finances. It was a more difficult task, but not an impossible one. I remembered that a few years ago, she had asked for my help in consolidating her investment portfolios. She had, with a great deal of suspicion and condescension, given me temporary access to her accounts so I could do my spreadsheet thing and give her a summary. I had done so, and I had, as is my habit, created a secure encrypted backup of the data for my own records. I opened the file. Her portfolio was a mess. It was a collection of high-risk speculative stocks, trendy tech startups, and risky real estate ventures recommended by her equally clueless friends at the country club. There was no discipline, no strategy. It was the portfolio of a gambler, not an investor. I did a current valuation of the stocks she held. Many of them were down significantly. A few of the startups had gone bust. Her net worth, which she projected as immense, was in fact far more modest and far less liquid than she pretended. The story was clear. Beatrice was not a financial titan. She was a woman who had inherited a great deal of money and had been slowly, steadily, and incompetently squandering it. Her control over our family, her grand gestures of generosity, were a facade, a desperate attempt to maintain the illusion of power and wealth. This was the foundation of her entire life, and I was about to prove, in a court of law, that it was made of sand. The pre-trial discovery process was a grinding, tedious war of paperwork, a battle fought entirely on my home turf. Beatrice and Claire's lawyer, a man whose slicked-back hair and expensive suit screamed style over substance, sent us a blizzard of interrogatories and requests for documents. They were fishing, trying to find a crack in the walls of the trust, a single misplaced comma that would give them an opening. Evelyn and I responded to each request with meticulous, maddening precision. We provided every document we were legally required to, and not a single page more. We answered every question with the cold, hard facts. Q. What is the current market value of Mr. Albright's business? A. The business is wholly owned by the Albright Family Trust. Mr. Albright is a salaried employee. See attached employment contract. Q. Please provide a full accounting of all assets held by the Albright Family Trust. A. The trust is not a party to this divorce proceeding. This request is improper and irrelevant. Our strategy was to be a brick wall of boring legal truth. While they were focused on my finances, we were preparing our own offensive. The core of our case was the massive financial audit I had conducted of our marriage. I had refined my spreadsheet into a comprehensive 100-page report, complete with charts, graphs, and source documents for every single transaction. It was a work of art, a masterpiece of forensic accounting. It told the story of our 15-year marriage in the stark, irrefutable language of numbers. It showed my consistent, substantial contributions versus Beatrice's sporadic and often self-serving injections of cash. It showed that my income had paid for their lifestyle, not the other way around. We submitted this report to the court as part of our financial disclosure. I can only imagine the scene in their lawyer's office when he received it. The moment when he realized that the quiet, boring man he was suing had a better, more detailed understanding of his own client's finances than they did. The moment he realized he was not fighting a man, but a walking, talking audit committee. The next phase of our strategy was to challenge Beatrice's standing in the case. She was not a party to the divorce, yet she was clearly the driving force behind it. Evelyn filed a motion to have Beatrice's financial records subpoenaed. We argued that since a significant portion of Claire's legal claims were based on her mother's financial contributions, we had a right to see the full, unvarnished picture of those contributions and their source. Their lawyer fought it, of course. He argued it was an invasion of privacy, a fishing expedition. But the judge, a pragmatic woman who had clearly grown tired of their legal theatrics, granted our motion. The dam was about to break. Faced with the prospect of having her entire precarious financial life laid bare in a court of law, Beatrice panicked. Her lawyer called Evelyn, his tone no longer arrogant, but desperate. He wanted to settle. "Let's make a deal," he'd said. "Let's find a number." "We already have a number," Evelyn had replied coolly. "The number is 0. Your client walks away with her personal belongings and nothing else. That is our first, last, and only offer." The pressure was immense. Their legal bills were mounting. Their case was crumbling. And the threat of financial disclosure hung over Beatrice's head like the sword of Damocles. It was at this point that Claire broke. She called me. It was the first time we had spoken directly since that day in the living room. Her voice was small, stripped of its usual confidence. "Thomas," she said, I can't do this anymore. My mother, this is all a mess." "Yes, it is," I said, my voice neutral. "She's trying to force me to lie in my deposition," Claire whispered, her voice cracking. "About your business, about the trust. She wants me to say you forced me to sign things, that I was afraid of you. But it's not true. You were just quiet." It was the closest she had ever come to an apology, or at least to an admission of a shared reality. "What do you want, Claire?" I asked. "I want it to be over," she said. And for the first time, I heard a note of genuine exhaustion, not manufactured drama. "I will sign whatever you want. I just want to be done with her, with all of this." A flashback. Claire, on our wedding day. Her father, a good simple man who had passed away years ago, had taken me aside. "You're a good man, Thomas," he'd said. "You're solid. My Claire. She has a good heart, but she gets swept up in things. She needs a solid foundation. Be her foundation." I had tried. For 20 years, I had tried to be that foundation. But I had learned that you cannot be a foundation for someone who is determined to live in a house of cards. The structure is doomed to fail. I told Claire to have her lawyer call Evelyn. The war was over. All that was left was to sign the terms of surrender. The final meeting was not a negotiation, it was a capitulation. We met at Evelyn's office. Claire was there with her lawyer. Beatrice was notably absent, a clear sign that her influence and her money had been withdrawn from the field of battle. Claire looked small and lost, a woman who had been swept up in a storm of her mother's making and was only now washing up on a foreign shore. The settlement agreement was simple. Claire would walk away with her personal belongings and a small one-time payment to help her get back on her feet. A gesture of goodwill I had insisted on, against Evelyn's advice. It was a quiet act of closure, a final severing of the ties. She signed the documents without a word, her hands trembling slightly. As she was leaving, she paused at the door and looked at me. "My mother always said you were weak, Thomas," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "because you were quiet. She never understood." "No," I said. "She never did." And that was it. 20 years of marriage, ended not with a bang, but with the quiet scratch of a pen on a legal document. The aftermath was a slow return to a new kind of normal. Claire, free from her mother's influence, moved to a small apartment and got a job as a teaching assistant. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she was struggling, but that she was also, for the first time in her life, standing on her own 2 feet. Beatrice retreated into her large, empty house, her social circle shattered, her reputation in tatters. She had lost her daughter, her power, and the illusion of wealth that had been the cornerstone of her identity. She had flown too close to the sun of her own arrogance, and her wings had melted. My life became my own again. The house, once a battleground, became my sanctuary. My children, now grown and with families of their own, came to visit more often. Our relationship, which had been strained by the years of their mother and grandmother's influence, began to heal. They saw me now, not as a boring, predictable father, but as a man of quiet strength, a man who had weathered a storm they were only now beginning to understand. One day, my son, a young engineer himself, was helping me in my home office. He picked up a thick, bound document from my desk. It was my final, comprehensive report on the finances of my marriage. He started flipping through it, his eyes widening at the charts, the graphs, the sheer, overwhelming detail of it all. "Dad," he said, a note of awe in his voice, This is incredible. The amount of work, the precision. It's just a compliance audit," I said with a small smile. "It's what I do." "No," he said, looking at me with a new understanding. "It's a fortress. You built a fortress out of facts." I looked at the report in his hands. He was right. That's what it was. It was a structure built of irrefutable, undeniable truth. And it was the strongest thing I had ever built. My professional life had been about ensuring that large, complex projects were built on solid foundations, that the fine print was honored, that the boundaries were respected. I had never thought I would have to apply those same principles to my own life, with such devastating precision. The experience had left its mark. I was more cautious now, more aware of the hidden vulnerabilities in the systems we build around ourselves, especially the systems of the heart. But I was not bitter, I was a realist. I had faced a catastrophic failure, and I had survived. I had not only survived, I had prevailed, through the quiet, methodical application of my own unique set of skills. In my study, on a shelf behind my desk, there is a single, leather-bound book. It is a first edition of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. It was the first book Claire had placed in the cardboard box on that fateful day. It is the only thing of mine that she touched that I kept. I open it sometimes, to a passage I have underlined. "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." My revenge was not loud or angry. It was not a quest to destroy, but a quiet, determined effort to restore order, to protect my foundation, to honor the truth. My revenge was to be exactly who I had always been, the quiet, boring man who reads the fine print. And in the end, that was more than enough.